Nice. We can certainly work with this gospel, can't we? Love God with your whole heart and love your neighbor as yourself. I am giving Pope Francis 57% of my homily today, measured by word count. I did the math. Now, I want to make something clear. This is going to be a carryover from last week's homily. Last week, the homily was all about keeping God above our political leanings. And earlier, I didn't explicitly state that our faith should mold our politics or our voting practices. I am sorry for that unintentional omission. You absolutely should vote with your conscience, your faith, and with the teaching of the church in mind. But I ask that you understand the church is a nonprofit organization, which means it is literally illegal for us to endorse a particular candidate. It cannot be done, no matter how black and white the issue might be. So I can't do that out of my obedience to the bishop. What the church can do is it provides instruction on how best to vote with an informed conscience. And the church trusts you to allow your faith to shape your life, including your politics and your ethics. Now, that said, we need to readdress the same problem from last week because it is serious. That all or nothing, us versus them mentality, that is a big problem in society right now. We are not listening to one another or respecting one another as God has called us to do. And conveniently enough, Pope Francis released a new encyclical this month, very much on this topic, Fratelli Tutti, on fraternity and social friendship. It's absolutely wonderful. It came out 2 weeks ago, so I'm sure you all read it cover to cover. But in case you didn't, here's a summary. Now, it was inspired by St. Francis's journey centuries ago to meet the Muslim Sultan Malik el-Kamil. And St. Francis instructed his brothers completely in contradiction to the common thinking of the era that when among non-Christians, they were not to renounce their own identity, but they were not to engage in arguments or disputes, but be subject to every creature for God's sake. That is radical Christianity at its finest, and we can answer that call as surely as St. Francis. So what does Pope Francis ask us to do with respect to people that we feel threatened by or at odds with? Here are his exact words. Paragraph 30. Isolation and withdrawal into one's own interests are never the way to restore hope and bring about renewal. Rather is closeness the culture of encounter. Isolation, no. Closeness, yes. Culture clash, no. Culture of encounter, yes. Paragraph 74. One detail about the passers-by and the Good Samaritan stands out. They were religious, devoted to the worship of God, a priest and a Levite. This detail should not be overlooked. It shows that belief in God and the worship of God are not enough to ensure that we are actually living in a way pleasing to God. A believer may be untrue to everything that his faith demands of him, and yet he thinks he is closer to God and better than others. The guarantee of an authentic openness to God is a way of practicing the faith that helps open our hearts to our brothers and sisters. Paragraph 115. Solidarity finds concrete expression in service, which can take a variety of forms in an effort to care for others. In offering such service, individuals learn to set aside their own wishes and desires, their pursuit of power, before the concrete gaze of those who are most vulnerable. Service always looks to their faces, touches their flesh, senses their closeness, and even in some cases suffers that closeness and tries to help them. Service is never ideological because we don't serve ideas, we serve people. Paragraph 127. If we accept the great principle that there are rights born of our inalienable human dignity, then we can rise to the challenge of envisioning a new humanity. We can aspire to a world that provides land, housing, and work for all. For this is the true path of peace, not the senseless and myopic strategy of sowing fear and mistrust in the face of outside threats. Paragraph 195. In political activity, we should remember that, appearances notwithstanding, every person is immensely holy and deserving of our love. Consequently, if I can help at least one person to have a better life, that already justifies the offering of my life. It is a wonderful thing to be of God's faithful people. We achieve fulfillment when we break down walls and our hearts are filled with names and faces. The great goals of our dreams and plans may only be achieved in part. But beyond this, those who love and those who no longer view politics merely as a quest for power may be sure that none of our acts of love will be lost, nor any of our acts of sincere concern for others. No single act of love for God will be lost, and no generous effort is meaningless, and no painful endurance is wasted. All of these encircle our world like a vital force. Paragraph 200. Dialogue is often confused with something quite different: the feverish exchange of opinions on social networks, frequently based on media information that is not always reliable. These exchanges are merely parallel monologues. They may attract attention by their sharp and aggressive tone, but monologues engage no one, and their content is frequently self-serving and contradictory. Here's the last one I have for today, paragraph 221. It's a long document. A false notion of tolerance has to give way to a dialogic realism on the part of men and women who remain faithful to their own principles while recognizing that others have the right to do likewise. This is the genuine acknowledgement of the other that is made possible by love alone. We have to stand in the place of others if we are to discover what is genuine or at least understandable in their motivations and concerns. It's such a great encyclical. It was good for you to hear the Pope's words directly, so I didn't want to edit or summarize it. But I'm going to give you one final word of commentary. You absolutely can read these words with many issues in mind. Did you hear the pro-life stance in Francis's message? Because I certainly did. It was very hard to ignore, frankly. I saw it everywhere. But also, there was care for the environment, to have concern for immigrants and the poor, to practice what we preach, and to respect all forms of human dignity. It's all there. And it all boils down to that simple but vital simple but vital value of fraternity and social friendship. Fratelli tutti. Or in other words, loving God with our whole heart and loving our neighbor as ourselves.